Common Honesty, a study of fundamental principles and their relation to the labor problem by Orren M. Donaldson, written in 1909 and addressed to the wage workers of the world. Common Honesty, Introductory. The most urgent need of the times in our industrial and civic life is that we grasp for ourselves and impress upon our children the fundamental principles of honesty. Throughout the civilized world, honesty is regarded as one of the cardinal virtues, and it is to be presumed that most men endeavor as best they may to exemplify it in their lives. And yet there is a vagueness in our comprehension of the subject that ought not to exist in a matter that lies so close to the foundations of society. We tell our children to be honest. We seek to inculcate honesty in the homes, in the school, and in the church, but neither in the home, nor in the school, nor even in the church do we teach what it is to be honest. We leave the most important part of the whole question untouched, and it is rare indeed that the child grows to manhood or womanhood with a definite idea of what honesty really means in the working out of the affairs of life. It is not to be wondered at that so many never pass beyond a crude comprehension of honesty as the mere keeping within the limits of the law. This is the interpretation of honesty proverbially dominant in the world of business, and the home and the school and the church are most often content to accept the business world's ideal and ask no questions. Thus, honesty itself is made the stalking horse for many kinds of dishonesty and becomes the very foundation on which is reared the great superstructure of social unrighteousness, which is becoming more and more the essential characteristic of our civilization. The great wrongs of the world are grounded in false conceptions of honesty and can never be righted until there is wrought into our ideals and lives an honesty of a better sort than has yet become prevalent, an honesty based on fundamental economic truth and tuned to the spirit of thou shalt not covet, rather than to the letter of thou shalt not steal. Common Honesty, Basic Principles. What then is honesty? What is it to be honest? Of what may a man say, this is mine, and take it for himself? And of what must he say, this is not mine, but another's, and leave it for him to whom it rightfully belongs? These are simple questions, but they are vitally important, and wrapped up in their answers the solution of every problem of the perplexing industrial situation of the present day. By bearing in mind the fact that all wealth, and consequently all property, save land and its natural appurtenances, have their origin in human labor, we shall find that there are a few obvious and basic principles underlying the entire subject, which thus resolves itself into a matter of easy analysis. The first principle of honesty is that every man has a right to what he produces. This is the basis of all just property rights, the cornerstone of all true political economy, and the fundamental requisite of a righteous social order. The created belongs to the Creator, the made to the Maker, the produced to the producer. This is an axiom. It is not a question for debate. There is no room for difference of opinion. It is inherent in the very nature of things. And the truth of it asserts itself spontaneously in every human heart. What a man makes is his own. There may be moral considerations that place a limitation on what a man may do with his own, but that does not affect the fact that it is his. The fundamental law of property and the basic principle of honesty is the truth that every human being has an inherent right to what he produces. It matters not whether the production be by hand or brain, or by a combination of the two, whether it be by himself alone or in collaboration with others, what he produces by himself, or that part of the whole produced by him in joint labor with others, that belongs to him. And the term production must be made so elastic as to include every human activity that ministers to any human need, be it permanent or temporary, physical, mental, or spiritual. A man may make a house to last a generation, a hat to last a season, or a ham sandwich to last a minute. He may make a box or a book, a lamp or a lecture, a saw or a sermon or a song. He may paint a barn or a picture. He may train horses or children. He may polish boots or brains. He may bring the raw production out of the earth or haul them to market or work them up into manufactured goods, or he may distribute the goods by selling them at wholesale or retail. He may counsel the living, heal the sick, or bury the dead. He may minister to individuals in the most menial labor, or he may administer public affairs in the most exalted office. In every possible service that he can render to himself or to his fellows within the bounds of this discussion, he is a producer, and to him belong the things he makes and the value that attaches to the service he renders. We shall find it important to keep these two ideals distinct, things and values. Man makes things, but man does not make values. Society produces values, or rather, social conditions determine values. Value is a social phenomenon, the resultant of two opposite forces, supply and demand. Value fluctuates up and down or back and forth like the marker at the middle of the tug-of-war rope, yielding first to one side and then to the other with the changes in the relative pull of the contending teams. But in matters of ownership, the thing and its value are one and inseparable. The right to a thing carries with it the right to the value that society attaches to it. The man who produces a thing or performs a service is the owner by right of the value that social conditions give to that thing or that service. The second principle, and if every man has a right to what he produces, there follows conversely and of necessity the second fundamental principle of honesty, which is that of all the things produced by human endeavor and of all the values that attach to such things, no man has a right to what he does not produce. This is a sweeping statement and must be explained at the outset as subject to several more or less important limitations. Of course, it is not meant to imply that a man can have rightful ownership only in the identical things and their values which he himself creates. The right of ownership carries with it of necessity the right of sale. If a man is the rightful owner of a thing or value, he may at his pleasure exchange with some other man for some other thing or value, of which he will thus become just as rightfully the owner. And we must recognize the right of gift as well as the right of sale. If a man may sell his own, he may also give away his own, and the right of one man to give implies the equal right of another to receive. Thus a man may have a right by gift to things and values which he not only did not produce, but for which he has given no equivalent. The further discussion of the ethical considerations involved in the making and receiving of gifts is not here attempted. Whatever we may think of the moral influence of gifts of pecuniary value upon the recipient, we certainly would not be justified in regarding the possession of property received in this way as essentially dishonest. The gift question presents itself most noticeably in practical life in the matter of inheritance. The right of a man to bequeath his property to his children or other relatives or friends when he is done with it is almost universally recognized, although it may be worthwhile to observe that under rightful honest social conditions no man would be impelled to such a course by the fear that his offspring or protégés would otherwise come to want, so that from the giver's side at least the occasion, and with it possibly the desire for the continuance of this long established custom would no longer exist, and that there are rights of society involved in this matter of inheritance, as well as rights of individuals in finding legal expression in the tax on legacies, now so generally levied, a tax that frequently consumes no inconsiderable portion of the amount bequeathed. Another exception to the principle that no man has a right to what he does not produce is found in the fluctuation of the value of the things that he rightfully possesses. To be sure, these changes in value are, through wear and depreciation, more often downward than upward, but many things produced by men increase in value, at least temporarily, and a few even permanently. This question of the fluctuation of values in its relation to honesty is a delicate one and will be treated further. Suffice it for the present to say that If a man rightfully owns a thing today, that doubles in value by tomorrow or by next year. The increase is just as rightly his own as was the original value. Just as there is no separating a thing from its original value, so there is no separating it from any increase of value that may accrue to it. Rightful ownership of one means rightful ownership of the other, with emphasis on the rightful. With these exceptions, which are really far less formidable in the aggregate of values than might at first seem true, this second principle is just as self-evident as the first. Indeed, the two are complements of each other. Every man has a right to what he produces, all he produces, and it must needs follow that of all the products of human labor, no man has a right to what he does not produce. And since all the things commonly counted as wealth, save only land and its accessories, are the product of human labor, there is no escaping the verdict that no man has a right to wealth other than land that is not the result of his own production. The third principle, and to these two fundamental principles of honesty must be added the third, which is that all men have equal rights in the bounties of nature. This proposition will need to be elaborated at some length, and having thus briefly stated it here, we will leave it for a time in order to consider a field of human activity in which the first two principles of honesty may be applied in large measure at least, without resorting to the third. Exchange of values. Exchange of values. The principles that every man has a right to what he produces and that no man has a right to what he does not produce are easy of application in a primitive society where the producer and the consumer are one and the same person or group of persons. In the pioneer agricultural days, each family was sufficient unto itself. Food, shelter, clothing, every necessity of life, and a few of the simple luxuries were wrested from the earth by the labor of the very individuals who in turn used and consumed the things produced. There could be no question that in the application of these principles of honesty, men had few dealings with their neighbors, and there was no opportunity for one to get what was not rightfully his except by outright burglary or theft. But as society becomes complex, the application gets to be more and more difficult. In this day of specialization and intense industrial organization, few men consume the identical things that they produce. But each man produces what he will or what he may and markets it, and with the proceeds buys for himself and his family the things that they eat and wear and use. Men live now by the exchange of their products and services, or rather by the exchange of the values that attach to these products and services. It is these exchanges that constitute what is loosely termed business, and in a general way, honesty in business is merely honesty in the exchange of value. Let us see then what is required by honesty in business. Honesty in business. Every honest business transaction is an exchange of values exactly equal to each other, exactly insofar as human judgment can be exact. Each party to the exchange gets what he believes to be the equivalent of what he gives. One man pays his dollar for a dollar's worth, the other sells his dollar's worth for $1. There is no financial advantage on either side. Each man is just as rich when the thing is done as he was before, and no richer. It is true that each gets something that he as an individual desires more than that which he gives, else there would be no exchange, but the value, that registration, usually in terms of money, of the social balancing of supply and demand, is the same on both sides. And it may be worthwhile to add that a very great part of the world's exchange of commodities is business of this character, honest business, a straight exchange of equivalents. But what of profit? It is evident that men do reap financial benefit through buying and selling, and it is equally evident that many of these men are doing an honest business. Whence then the gain? The answer is found in large degree in the fact that what is commonly called profit in buying and selling is simply the name given to a certain kind of production. When a man buys at one price and sells at a legitimate advance in It means that by his labor as a conveyor of goods, or as a storer, or as a distributor, he has produced a value equal to the difference between the buying and the selling price. And this form of production is not so different from forms more easily recognized. The Economist tells us that all material production is merely the moving of things from one place to another. Surely the trader's or merchant's service in moving things from the factory and storehouse to the customer is not very different from the service of the farmer or the miner in moving other things from the land into the channels of commerce. And there is little honest gain in business that cannot be accounted for by this form of production, and under honest social conditions, practically all else in the way of profit should be eliminated. There are, of course, cases where changes in social conditions result in an increase in value between the time of buying and the time of selling. As has already been said, such increase belongs rightly to the man who rightly owns the things that are so affected. But this sort of change of value, either of increase or decrease, is a small factor in legitimate business, and sometimes, too, a part of the gain in trade must be regarded as interest on the deferred payment, and a part, in such a case, as insurance of the account, both of which, under present conditions, must be accepted as factors in the process of production. It may be set down, then, that the fundamental principle of honesty in business is that the values exchanged must be equivalent the one for the other. This is the very essence of honesty, its sum and substance. The honest man is just as insistent to give as much as he gets as he is to get as much as he gives. The desire to get something for nothing, much for little, or more for less, is dishonesty itself. The man who gets something for nothing is a robber or a pauper, and voluntary pauperism is as little to be respected as robbery. It is pertinent to ask just how men are to know when they give and get exact equivalents in trade, and it must be admitted that there is no absolute standard for the making of these valuations. There is, however, a universal and universally satisfactory standard that obtains wherever men are free and exchange is free, in other words, wherever competition is free, and that is the standard of the mutual agreement of the parties concerned. When neither party is under coercion from the other to buy or sell, and when both parties are free to buy or sell of whom they choose, the right price, the correct balancing of values, is easily found to the satisfaction of both. This implies that the parties to the transaction have equal knowledge of the things exchanged and of the conditions affecting their value. An honest seller will not accept a price that he knows the buyer would not give if he, the buyer, were in possession of all the facts known to him, the seller. Nor will an honest buyer consent to pay less than he knows the seller would ask if he, the seller, were in possession of all the facts known to him, the buyer. The principle of caveat emptor may hold in law, but it will not hold in morals. Free market necessary. Nor can the seller any more honestly resort to any means whatsoever to limit the buyer's choice, nor the buyer to limit the seller's choice, in order on the one hand to exact a higher price, or on the other to force a lower price. Honesty calls for a free market, without which there is lacking the conditions requisite for this automatic balancing of one value with another that ensures an exchange of equivalents. Coercion of any kind by either party for the narrowing of the market or for bringing about the exchange in any other way than by the free will of both parties is dishonest. This truth is recognized in the many legal enactments against combinations for the restraint of trade, and in the popular conviction that all trusts and monopolies are injurious and iniquitous. The righteous indictment of the trust is not that it raises the price of its commodities, sometimes it lowers prices, nor that it drives other people out of business. Honest competition sometimes does that, but that by artificial means it widens the margin between what it pays out and what it takes in to a degree that cannot be accounted for by its parts in the production of the goods it sells. It does not matter so much to the world whether prices are low or high, so long as they are natural, honest prices fixed by free competition in an open market. Such prices are bound to represent nothing but production, and the minute any price stands for production plus something else, special privilege, political pull, monopoly, it ceases to belong in the honesty class. Society can better afford to pay a little more for what it buys and have it all come back in the seller's disbursements minus only his part in the production than to pay less when any part of the price is a mere rake-off for the seller for which he gives nothing in return. The prime requisite of honesty in business is the free market, and he who tampers with the free market is just as much the enemy of honesty as he who poisons a city's water supply is an enemy of the public health.